Okay, so what did you all think about that lunch? Yes, excellent. And then those of you that are online with us, hopefully you had a nice long break as well. So we are at the home stretch, and our time together will soon conclude, at least for this moment, yet recognizing that we have hopefully had some good conversations, some deeper conversations, and guess what? We are going deeper. So we are doing what? We are going deeper. Let me hear you. Yes, we are going deeper. So we are going to talk now and be on this path around fostering inclusive conversations and some of the key things that we want to make sure that we are aware of, some present day issues, right, that we are hearing a lot about, and how we evolve there. So I want to ask you again, to what extent, remember we talked a little bit about how you are considering the impact of bias and the various forms of discrimination on your thoughts and actions, right? So based on the activity that we did prior to lunch, it helped us to begin to think about the values and the decisions and the choices that we make based on our values, right? Who do we include, and based on what characteristics, along with what are the various forms of identity that we also know can sometimes turn into discrimination, and how does that impact our thoughts and interactions. We also want to make sure that we are constantly considering our impact of inequity and acts of exclusion for your colleagues, and we're really honestly examining that. So certainly in the chat, you can share with us where you might be, and in the room, just want to see a show of hands in terms of just at any point, how many of you are actually considering the impact of bias and discrimination on your thoughts and actions. Is that something that you are doing actively? If you're doing it actively, let me see a show of hands, and those online, okay, with us as well. Thank you. Yep, I see we got a couple hands. Thank you very much online as well. So this whole element is about becoming more conscious, becoming much more intentional. And we have to do that within our chapters as leaders, especially as we're making key decisions that are going to set that inclusive atmosphere, okay? And so as we're on that element, just wanted to recognize that we see a lot of various dynamics of oppression and how they show up. And you have to determine whether you are part of these systems or not, and just by, for example, coming to a hotel where you have to furnish a credit card. How many of you had to furnish a credit card? What happens if you don't have one? You have to do what? Pay money, usually, right? How much money? Could be $250, could be $500. What if you don't have that? What if I'm a new professional and I don't have a credit card? Can I come to this event? What if I'm a new professional and I don't have $500 to put up for this event? Can I connect? So I think that, and that's just one example, and there are many. That's a system that we have to participate in, right? Because that's how it is. That's what we do. The question for us is, the challenge for us is, how do we mitigate? What are the areas where we can mitigate some of that for someone who may or may not be new to the field, may or may not have to participate in the systems and the structures that can also isolate? It just is. And so the question is, how do we step beyond ourselves as leaders to continue to recognize these common elements, the systems that we have to participate in, and what then can we do to mitigate some of that? So that's just one example. So thinking about these common elements of oppression, everything from economic power to the myth of scarcity to defined norms, violence, and the spectrum of violence, invisibility, everything from stereotyping to tokenism. These are all elements of oppression that I think that as leaders, we want to make sure that we're aware of and how we can raise our consciousness and continue to really understand what that looks like for ourselves, our members, certainly our clients, and the ways in which we move through society at large. So here, we're just going to kind of run through some key definitions to make sure that we're all on the same page. We talk about institutional oppression. This is where we're talking about the mistreatment of a particular group of people that's kind of enforced by societal institutions. A lot of these institutions we have to participate in. Okay, that is a reality. Then when we also think about then we also think about internalized oppression. There are then things that we often take on based on our own groups, and we tend to perpetuate that amongst our own groups of people based on our identities within perhaps marginalized groups as well. So these are things regarding all the messages that we get over time that can ultimately show up as internalized oppression. I was the first to create a chapter through the National Coalition Building Institute when I worked at Rochester Institute of Technology in the 80s, and we did a lot of prejudice reduction work, and we had to really be conscious of what we called at that time the records, all the messages that we get from television, radio, the media, our families, et cetera, and how we sometimes transition those internally. So that's really important that we're aware of some of those self-sabotaging negative stereotypes that we also perpetuate based on groups that we belong. What are some of those, for example, that we might perpetuate about women in an organization predominantly of those who identify as a woman? So let's continue to keep that in mind. Remember, I come back to these acts of exclusion, making sure that we are keeping them at the forefront, because we want to create inclusive environments and not exclusive environments. And how then do you have and make sure that you are constantly practicing and have the skill set and the courage to continue to address the acts of exclusion and call some of these things out? So what's the impact when we think about oppression, the spectrum of the acts of exclusion? We see fatigue and stress. There are a lot of groups that have been going through a lot of dynamics around oppression, and depending on where you are in your intersectionalities, we also have to remember how it shows up. We know that over the last 2 years, we've seen a significant amount of stress and anxiety given what's been happening with the pandemic, and also the social justice and racial justice revival and reckoning, or whatever you choose to call it. And so we also have to understand that there are many centuries, though, of history that this impacts, and also the field that you're in also has connotations where it has been oppressive for certain groups. And so we have to continue to remember that. And what changes can we then make going forward, right? And so we know that the impact is fatigue and stress, anxiety, burnout, depression, all of that. And I think that that's the piece kind of when we talk about below the waterline that sometimes we don't necessarily see and that we don't necessarily connect into as we're on the path to advance the profession. We're real people, and it's okay to be real. And within that, that's where we also have to be real about the words that we use and how we refer to one another, how we also support one another within the profession, and also how we really call out those elements that we know we need to continue to have growth towards. So making sure that we're clear about our words is important. We've heard and seen a lot about words lately, and definitely within the climate of the last 6 to 8 to 10 years in terms of how people are using their words. And so I love Uta Berg's quote, who says, "Words are singularly the most powerful force available to humanity. We can choose to use this force constructively with words of encouragement or destructively using words of despair. Words have energy and power with the ability to help, to heal, to hinder, to harm, to humiliate, and to humble." So that's where I ask you, what words are we using within the profession? What words are we using with our members? And are they isolating? We were just having a conversation about microaggressions at one of the tables, thank you all. And I said we were going to go deeper because we're hearing a lot about some of these terms, and some of you may know what these mean and some of you may not. So I just want to make sure that we're all clear on the fact that, yes, words do have power. And we've seen very publicly how words have been used. So what is this microaggression? What does it mean? And so I'm going to ask you at your tables, just go ahead, and also in Zoom rooms, to identify what you think a microaggression is, and share if you would like. Has anybody actually seen or experienced a microaggression? Let me see a raise of hands. Anybody seen or experienced what they believe to have been a microaggression? Also online, thank you. Thank you very much. So let's go into your Zoom rooms for about 5 minutes. I know that this is kind of off script, but I think it's important to make sure that you have a brief conversation about what you think it is and how it potentially shows up. So we'll come back in about 5 minutes, and then also, what ways do we need to continue to be conscious within Cru about the words that we use? All right? Thanks, everyone. Wonderful. Excellent. So it's glad to have you all back with us. And if I could just say, those of you that are online with us, we just so appreciate you all as well. Let's give them an amazing round of applause. We miss you. We miss you, and we're just so grateful that Cru was willing to invest the time, the energy, and the money, right? Y'all know this costs money, to do this hybrid opportunity. So this was great. So microaggressions. Hopefully you had some really good, juicy conversations. I implanted myself at one table down here on the front as well, and we had a good conversation also about what they are and what it actually, how some of those dynamics show up. So microaggressions, and there's another book. I love this particular book. It's really cool. It's very easy to get through, by Maura Cullen. She does a lot of work across colleges and universities, and called 35 Dumb Things Well-Intentioned People Say. And again, she's been doing this work for a long time too. So I want to make sure you have just resources for you. As we think about microaggressions, it's really important that we're hearing more about it. Again, it's been existing in the environment, yet it's an opportunity for us to, as leaders, raise our consciousness and step forward, recognizing that microaggressions, yes, they can be direct or indirect. Okay, sometimes they are subtle put downs that often happen to individuals who have been excluded, underrepresented, perhaps marginalized, and sometimes they're even disguised as a compliment. So I don't need to be told that I speak well. Thank you very much. All right. I also don't need to be told that I am articulate. All right? So I think that that's just an example. And so the microaggressions can also be hostile. They can be derogatory. They can be negative insults. They can be both verbal and nonverbal. So it's really important to understand that. The key thing here that I always want to say is, it's not about you. Like, what? It's not about me? Everything's all about me. And that's great. That's wonderful. Y'all are looking awesome. But this is not about you. This is about the other person or the group that you have impacted or offended or slighted. So there are different levels of microaggressions, and there's microassaults, which Dr. Daryl Wing Su, she really kind of coined the term microaggression some time ago. Microassaults, these are the biggest. They're obvious. They are in your face. They can be subtle, but usually are not, okay? And I have had situations where I've had colleagues to literally, I think in a training a couple weeks ago, someone was talking about her daughter who's Jewish had money thrown at her. Okay? It happens, unfortunately. Another colleague of mine who grew up in West Virginia, for the first time in her 50 years was she called the N-word when she went home after the pandemic. So these are, again, things that do happen that are in your face, and again, they can also happen anonymously because there's kind of a comfort level sometimes. People hide behind that shield, but these are micro assaults. Then we also have micro insults, and these are the more subtle acts which can kind of convey some contempt for certain groups as well. Sometimes they're spur of the moment, backhanded. It can be kind of hard to tell, but it's all about how it's received. And I think that's really important. And then when we talk about micro invalidations, is that this is when someone gives you, for example, a compliment, or they may make a mistake or a microaggression, and then they're trying to tell you, well, I don't see how you really feel that way. Right? Making you ultimately feel like, okay, am I crazy? Like you really feel like I might be off, or really questioning whether or not that is something that I should or should not feel. And often the person who's doing it never really realizes that they're doing something harmful. And so we have to remember that as we're talking about the power of words and our examples and the power of our nonverbal behaviors, that there are microaggressions, and really want you all to become aware of it so that you can, as leaders, get to the place where you can call it out, okay? And there are ways to do that, certainly, as well as recognize it. And so I've given you a couple of examples here. One, for example, is a black male college student, highly selective, is asked what sport he plays, kind of with the underlying assumption that he didn't gain admission based on his academic credentials. There's another micro-invalidation example here. Perhaps an Asian American professor is asked, "Where are you from?" And when she says, "I'm from Kansas," "No, really, where are you from?" Okay. Suggesting that she wasn't born here, maybe her parents weren't born here. And then another one, a Muslim student sits in a class where a professor makes an Islamophobic comment during their lecture. So that just kind of gives you some examples, and you could take out the characters and put in any characters. You know, it could be a marketing colleague, it could be a CEO that you're working with. It could be a marketing professional where this has happened to. It could be someone at a brokerage firm. So just thinking about that these examples do happen, and I know that you've probably had a chance to share some of those in your rooms. So what I'm going to ask you now to do is to pull out a piece of paper, and I'm going to read off a couple of statements, and you get to check mark if this is something that you've either said or something that you've heard someone else say. Okay? So, I tend to pronounce unique or foreign names incorrectly, so I just shorten them up to make things easier. Anybody know someone that's done that? I see that hand going up, thank you. Doesn't mean that that was you, but you know, my name is Mariama. Don't call me M, I'm good, right? I think it's important if to kind of work with, be okay to challenge yourself to get the names correctly. I do some work with EA, and we have people all across the country coming to trainings, and I always ask them to, you know, please pronounce your name. If I get it wrong, please let me know. You know, and we're working with folks in Europe and Asia and all of that. So I think it's really important because names mean a lot in culture. I get along with everyone. After all, we're all pretty much all the same. Anybody heard someone say that? Yep. I consider myself colorblind, or I don't see color. Has anyone either said or heard that said? Yep, thank you all for sharing online as well, raising your hand. Again, these are things that either you may have heard, okay, a colleague say. I have told colleagues born in other countries they speak English well. I've heard that said. I have complimented a Black colleague on her intelligence. I've heard that said. I've had a board member say that to me. Wow, you're so smart. I would hope so after going to Syracuse University, right? So, interesting. I have commented on someone else's body or appearance to that person or others, including a compliment. Now, I know that that can kind of go each way, right? Because we are a community of women, and so I think part of it is understanding what the parameters are there. Thank you all. Thanks, Jen, Rebecca, Karen, thank you online. When I go to a meeting with my team, I always sit in the same chair. Has anyone seen that happen? Or has anyone done that? I've made assumptions about members or colleagues that have been proven wrong. I know I've done that. And even if I don't say anything, I sometimes judge others by how they look or what they're wearing. It's like, oh my gosh, she's got those 10-inch heels on. What, like, and then your mind goes into this whole thing, and it's like, wait a minute, what am I doing? What am I doing? Okay? I have walked up to someone assuming that they were a person because they looked similar. Have you seen someone do that? Or have you done that? I often look at or reply to messages on my phone when I'm with others. And I sometimes talk about people behind their backs rather than discuss my criticisms with them directly. So these are both verbal, nonverbal acts, and I'm happy to discuss with anybody if you have any that you want to know more about at our next break. But just thinking about the microaggressions, and some of these are rooted in power, right, and privilege. Sometimes people also say, well, what do you mean I always sit in the same chair? Like, why is that a microaggression? As a leader, there's an opportunity for you to share power, understanding that power is also communicated by distance and where you sit. How are you shifting that? That's huge. I'm also going to step on another set of toes, perhaps. How is it that we are in the boardroom and everyone sits at the board table and the staff sit behind us? What's the connotation there? Or if we're in the boardroom and we have guests or sometimes even new board members, the new board members sit behind the existing board members. I've seen it. Sometimes it happens within our organizations, within our chapters. So just an opportunity to think about what we're reinforcing. And if we're setting an inclusive environment, are we willing to do something different that shares the power and privilege that we have both visually and non-verbally and verbally? Okay? I know y'all are kind of quiet, so I think I'm going to move on because I might be stepping on some toes here, but it's okay. Love y'all all the same. So when we think about continuing to go deeper, we want to remember that we want to avoid tokenism. I know that some chapters are continuing to grapple with representation and figuring out, how you continue to create that diverse representation. And you want to make sure that, yes, you're on that path, and understanding why you're on that path is going to be critical, and then also making sure that you are avoiding tokenism, where you're not constantly connecting into the only person in the room that might represent an underrepresented, oppressed, marginalized minority group, however you want to define that, and that they're not the key person, the go-to person that you're asking for everything around diversity. And we're going to get to that because when you think about it, that's where, again, there's an opportunity for you to learn and grow. And it doesn't mean that you don't authentically ask the questions, yet you do have to continue to remember how often you tap into people is how often people feel tapped out. So that's going to be important. And so when we think about racism, so now we're getting into a little bit of another topic, of course, because we've been hearing a lot about it, definitely over the last several years and prior to. We know that we have challenges around race and ethnicity, and that's why I want to make sure that we highlight some of that today and really appreciate the work that Heather McGhee and so many others. I mean, I've got some resources for you at the end of the deck, and so many others that are helping us to really kind of pick apart the history and figure out how we move forward. And so I had an opportunity to facilitate a dialogue with Heather McGhee and some other executives, and her book is just phenomenal because she comes at it from an economic standpoint. She talks about the wealth gap. She talks about the role that real estate has played in the wealth gap. Phenomenal. And one of her closing sentences, which I think is one of the most powerful in the book, is that she says, in short, we must emerge from this crisis in our republic with a new birth of freedom, rooted in the knowledge that we are so much more. When the we in we the people is not the sum of us, but all of us. We are greater than and greater for the sum of us. And so she talks about this sum of us in the sense that it's not about the us versus them. It's about the we. It's about the solidarity and still being able to have our unique identities at the same time. And so when we think about the cost of racism, yep, I got a lot of words on these slides. In essence, just want to make sure when you go back, you look at the slide deck. I think the Annie Casey Foundation does a fabulous job, and they have for a long time, really breaking down elements around race, ethnicity, underrepresentation in our communities. And we see here race. We all know race is socially constructed. Okay, so I just put that out there as a reminder. Racism is the system by which those racial hierarchies exist, right? Individual racism happens at that one-to-one level. in terms of how I'm thinking about a particular group and the actions that I take against that group. Institutional and structural are within our systems. So the systems that you all have to operate within, who is able to get a mortgage, who's able to buy property, who's not able to buy property, who's buying property in certain communities. All of these elements, institutional, structural. And then looking again at individual, institutional racism and structural racism. So just again, awareness here. And I'm happy to talk with anybody more about some of these definitions. And then we've got the interpersonal racism, right, between each other, and how we really manifest and how it manifests publicly, as well as internalized racism. Very similar as we talked about internalized oppression, recognizing that we can have some ideologies and beliefs about our own groups as well. And then we think about justice and the equity for certain groups and for people of all races. So I know I went through that pretty quickly, but again, it's about a learning journey. It's just to show you that, wow, there are a lot of different dynamics here, right? And while I've been on the journey, learning the journey, relearning the journey, and working and teaching and educating on the journey, just to share with you, there's an opportunity for you to dig deeper, okay? And so recognizing that systematic racialization also is an element that's out there. And this is also cuts across major political, economic, and social systems, the very systems that you all have to participate in. So how then, like Ibram Kendi says, do you become an anti-racist within a system that has structural and institutional racism in it? How do we do that? And one of the ways that I think that we can do that is through allyship. And so as we talk about elements around culture and racism and other isms, because it's not just about, racism. We know that there's ageism, and we know that there's homophobia. Like, there are many different levels. One thing that I think can help us is to think about how we are truly setting up our systems for allyship. And how are we truly setting up our environments within Cru to be allies to certain groups? Now, when we think about allyship, how many of you have heard the term? I'm going to ask you to raise your hand here in the room and online. Okay, I think we see lots here. Thank you. Excellent. And so we know that as we move forward and we think about allyship, that's where it is truly making sure that we are supportive of another person or group based on a particular identity that they represent. This is not something that happens overnight. It's a lifelong process, and it includes some of the very elements that I was talking about earlier: trust, transparency, accountability, based on certain groups and identities that you have, right? And I would imagine that you as women want to make sure that you have allies as well. And so in that vein, one of the other pieces that I often like to point out that some people are often shocked about is that allyship, it's not self-defined. You can say that you want to be an ally. That's great. The question is, have you done the work to be acknowledged as an ally? And so when you get that affirmation that someone does recognize you as an ally, that's really golden. So here are some do's as you're on the journey to being allies. Some of these do's are making sure that all the same things that we talked about, being open to listening, being aware of our own biases, learning the history, making sure that we do the work every day to be a better ally. And I know I skipped all the way to the end. And then here are some don'ts. Don't always expect to be taught or shown everything. You've got to continue to do some of that work. Now, again, it doesn't mean that you can't ask, but again, you've got to be willing to demonstrate that you're doing the work within your leadership teams to continue to raise the level of awareness and cultural awareness and moving through that spectrum, hopefully to cultural humility and cultural intelligence. So don't always expect to be shown. It's not about oppression Olympics, meaning like I have it harder as a woman than you have it as harder as someone who may have a disability or may have it harder as someone who is a veteran or is GLBTQIA. It's not about that. That's divisive. And so we also want to make sure that we don't behave as though we know best. There's that power and privilege thing. And taking credit for other people's work. How do we make sure that we don't do that? And then again, always asking and making sure that we don't assume. So these are all things that you all know. I'd love to see them put into practice more within organizations. Because we know them, it's just how do we actually do it? So I'm going to give you a scenario here, and you're going to spend time at your table teams and in your Zoom rooms to talk through this scenario and how you would actually solve this as an inclusive leader. So the situation is that a board member walks out of a meeting following a heated conflict about whether to accept a candidate for the board who has made disparaging remarks on social media about people who have autism. 4 of the board members feel it's a positive step toward DEI to not accept the candidate. 4 members don't agree, and they feel like there's a conflict with their religious values and that it will make other members uncomfortable. Keep in mind that the candidate meets all the qualifications. So, how would you solve this? What would you do? What are some of the things you need to consider given this scenario? You've got 5 minutes to talk at your table about this scenario and what would you do? How would you handle it as an inclusive leader? Thanks, everyone. We're going to put you into your rooms as well. If we could, it'd be great if just one group wanted to go, each person to one mic, just to say what you talked about. What were the takeaways? And if you came to a resolution, feel free to share that. So I'd love to have one person at the left, the mic on my left, one person at the mic on my right. Yep, I see somebody getting up. Yeah, I do, absolutely. It's happening. It is happening. I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen, right, everybody? It's coming along. Thank you. Yes, it is happening. Yes, it's happening. Give your colleagues a hand. Thank you. Yes. I know, I'm trying to get y'all to move around a little bit. I'd like to just kind of put these things positively into the atmosphere, and somehow they just happen. It's great. So with that, can we hear from those of you that are on my left? Yes.
Hi, Laura Wynn, Crew Coastal Virginia, again today. Sorry, you guys are seeing a lot of me. So I think what we came to the conclusion that it doesn't really matter what the board, what they were for, what their agency was, or anything like that, but that possibly this person could have made a statement in passing that may have been interpreted or that they didn't realize was disparaging in the context of the way they said that. could have been interpreted. Also, we brought up the religious aspect, like he who cast the first stone, that type of thing. Like, are we always trying to give somebody a second chance or give them the opportunity to either explain, retract, somehow make what they possibly made a mistake on better? We didn't come to the conclusion whether or not we would accept that person or not on the board, but we definitely talked about those issues.
Thank you. Thank you. So you talked about some deep dynamics. Thank you. Yes, let's go to...
I'm ready?
Yes.
Sure. Kim Cameron, PT Crew, which is in North Carolina, Greensboro. So I said, not no, but hell no. He is not coming on the board. There's always too many excuses for folks who make disparaging remarks on social media about an oppressed or marginalized community. You can replace that word with autism with Black, woman, Hispanic, immigrant, anything, and would you be having that same conversation about, is their words misinterpreted, or did they not say the right thing? And I think, so she told me, I'm an executive director of a nonprofit.
Yes,
so,
thank you.
I wouldn't want that drama. I wouldn't want to deal with it. Social media lives forever, whether you delete it or not. Somebody always has a screenshot, and they're ready to pull that gun out whenever they need it against you. So it just would not be a good decision for that organization to accept that board member at the current time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. And we also have Jen Paisley. You're going to share with us what you all came up with or what you all discussed. She's coming in from online.
Sorry, I'm unvideoed versus that.
Hi, Jen. I'm just going to give you a minute or so.
My thought on it is that that person would not be, at this point in time, would not be an acceptable candidate, but that you could put a stipulation on the person and say that if they wanted to apply in the future, that they'd have to go through some sort of diversity training and show that they understood and kind of graduated from that before they could be considered.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you for sharing. Great to see you. Thank you. And I think we also have another colleague here on my right.
Hi, I'm Kathy Carr from Crew Austin. Hi, Jen. I concur with what PT Crew said. No, absolutely not. You want your board members to be leaders and people that are looked up to. This person is not. And we wouldn't choose them, we wouldn't want them to be a leader. Social media does live forever. And it will come up, and we would tell them why if we had an opportunity to say, you're allowed to have opinions, but you should keep them to yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your feedback. We'll go here to the mic on my left. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Janet Whaler from Crew, Connecticut.
Hello.
We had a pretty short discussion at our table, and our discussion revolved around the fact that this is not a place where you can make a decision. As people who are interested in DEI and being fair, that you need to investigate. We don't know for sure. This is accept a candidate to make a disparaging remark. Has it been reviewed? This is an HR process. This is something that you have to be very sure that you're giving up a candidate that may be qualified, or you're bringing on someone that you may need. There is no good answer to this other than you need more homework. You need to look into it. You need to investigate it. And you don't want to be part of the problem that says, well, I'm just going to take their word for it that that's something that he does. We don't want him.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for your feedback. And then we have a comment here from your colleague on my right.
Hi, Ilona Mitchell with Crew, Idaho. So we had a similar conversation. First of all, I would probably take a break from the meeting and address the person that walked out, go check in with them, see what's going on, maybe get them to a place, what are you feeling, what are you thinking, get them to a place where maybe they could re-enter the meeting again, and then dig a little bit deeper. Find out from the guy or from social media, what were the remarks, what were the intentions behind the remarks, what was going on. We've all seen the picture of Prince Charles where from one view it looks like he's maybe flipping somebody off, and you see another view and he's holding 3 fingers up. So there's always a different perspective that you can find. So I agree with the lady down there that I think you just need to dig a little bit deeper and understand the situation.
Thank you for your feedback. So we've got definitely some different approaches. And so one way that I would encourage you to think about it is, yes, we know that conversations do sometimes get heated. Sometimes people are even on the verge of fighting, right? And I think how you're setting these norms in your meetings and in your settings are very important. And as it relates to conflict, we want to make sure that we don't have conflict avoidant environments. We do want to deal with the conflict, and how you choose to deal with it is important. Recognizing also that it's important to let your team members know, to let your members and at board meetings, that there are going to be differences, right? We're going to have differences, and here's how we in this chapter manage these differences. We always want to, if there's name calling, personal attacks, threats that come up, we definitely want to make sure that we're addressing that. And we also want to ask that you connect with people one-to-one. I think the conversation about trying to understand what's at the root of it is also helpful, and then make a decision that aligns with your core values, your principles, your mission, and your vision, whatever decision you come to. So for some chapters, it's going to be a heck no or a hell no. For some, it's going to be, we want to give someone another opportunity. For some, it's going to be, no, not at this time. However, after you've shown some growth, perhaps. So that's where ultimately, what are your core values? Are your core values as a chapter clear? How are they aligned with the core values that have been expressed at national? Are you all on the same page? What are your principles in terms of how you interact and the expectations that you have of leaders? Previous behavior and current. And then ultimately, what's your mission and vision around DEI? And how are you connecting with that? Remember earlier I talked about kind of advancing DEI and making sure that you're clear about your statements, your principles, and your values. Once you have that, then you've got your decisions. Although there are some elements that you're going to need to weave, for some of you it will be no. For some of you it might be a maybe, and for some of you it will be a yes and more to come. The key thing is connecting into the core values and the mission and vision of Cru and your chapter as well. Any other questions that you might have, certainly we can connect either after the session. I'll definitely be around. And if there are any questions, does anybody have any questions about just what we've covered up to this point on internalized oppression, racism, microaggressions? If you have a question, definitely feel free to go to the mic or to let us know if you're online, and we're happy to take your question. Okay, all right, so we're gonna keep moving, and we're almost there. We've talked a little bit about allyship and the elements of allyship and how you progress to allyship, because it's all connected. Say with me, it's all connected. It's all connected. All right? As you think about how you're setting that atmosphere for inclusion, because I would like to share, and I'm almost almost positive that that is one of your solutions for moving to the next level, for growing Cru, for growing your chapter. And so the question then is, how do you do that? And I know that some of you have plans, some of you have jumped right in and you're comfortable in that space. Some of you have jumped right in and you might be flailing. One key thing that I want to encourage you to do is to be clear about your why, and then make sure that you can be accountable to that and express that. So then that's where we talk about in some of these scenarios, and I know that there are many others around microaggressions, things that come up around the board table, things that come up in your chapter. Wherever you can, please remember to implore your what I call DEI dialogue tips. Love the campus in Missouri because it's a really great resource, and these are just some common dialogue tips that I often use as I'm doing restorative dialogues with teams and groups and facilitating. So wherever you can, try to set that relaxed tone. Make sure that you are a good listener as a leader. I know that sometimes those of us that are in power positions and also are constantly leading and directing, it can be a challenge sometimes. So I say, even from my own experience, continue to practice that good listening and setting that relaxed tone. Trying to stay impartial. Yes, there are times where you are the key leader and you may have to come to a final decision, yet how do you allow those concepts and ideas to bubble up? How can you stay impartial during the decision-making process so that you can allow the discussion to move forward within the time frame that you set for the discussion? So I've given you some other strategies, in terms of what led you to believe this, what I hear you saying. Like, these are all some pretty standard elements around communication that we know can be helpful. Does anyone have an experience that's different than what we're hearing today? That's another opportunity to draw in and draw out comments or draw out people who may have a different viewpoint. Making sure that we acknowledge the hopes and fears that folks bring to the table. Again, interrupting expressions around prejudice, bias, stereotyping, right? It's going to be important. And then always making sure that we are aware of the group process. As leaders, we are often so focused on getting it done. And yes, we do have to keep track of time, yet also make sure that you are kind of using your third eye and looking at what's happening in the room and within the group and being aware of group dynamics. Okay? I also say discussion is not debate, and looking at how people are communicating with one another is also going to be an indicator of what you're allowing in your climate and in your culture. Are people emailing you behind so-and-so's back to talk about what somebody said at the meeting or what somebody didn't say at the meeting? Or are we able to put this on the table? All right. Making sure that you look at various viewpoints, asking people to think about the concerns and what's underlying it. And I also think it's important that we don't get siloed in terms of one particular perspective from the one person that is vocal. Let's figure out how we draw out some other perspectives. Just in terms of our language in general, let's try to use the word and rather than but. Why? Because and often is a unifier, but tends to negate anything prior to that. So and can be a really great unifier and a bridge. And then a lot of times what I see that is when we're in the leadership role, we say, well, I'm just a member of the board, or I'm just this membership chairperson. let's not diminish ourselves as we are taking on these leadership roles. We got to think about our language and constantly practice. I have to constantly practice it as well. And then finally, let's be aware of the dynamics of cross-cultural communication, right? We talked about some of this. Not everybody is representing all of their group. You're not representing all women. You're not representing all women from a certain region. I'm not here representing all women from Syracuse, New York, for example, all right? Because there are very different distinctions between regions as well in the country. Help people appreciate each other's communication styles, understanding some of the cultural labels and stereotypes that might come up, and then also making sure that we are not here to kind of equate experiences. We want to emphasize the distinction of experiences and let people know that we are interested in knowing what it's like to be in their shoes, but we don't really know exactly what it's like. So that's going to be important. And then finally, sensitivity, all these words that we know helps to foster inclusive environments, empathy. And lastly, make sure you're getting out to spend time with all kinds of people. Do y'all remember that image that I showed earlier? Making sure you're reading, listening to podcasts, watching programs. I know you've had a bazillion trainings probably, and will have many more. Because every topic we talked about today, you could take a whole course in courses that I've had the privilege and honor to take. So I think that that's the other piece, is that there's always learning that can be happening to really broaden your viewpoint. And then we want to make sure that we also set that atmosphere for openness by asking those open-ended questions. Y'all know this, these are just reminders, okay? And then I've included here for you some questions that will help you to invite others into the dialogue, okay? Asking people, do they agree? What do you all think about this idea? Is there a strong case against it? Again, you all know that. And then questions that unite, okay? What's really going on here? How do other people see this issue? How does this make you feel? Questions that unite us. And then, questions that we can use when there's disagreement. Who often or has had disagreement within their leadership team? Anybody? Okay, hopefully most of us, because disagreement can be healthy. And so the question is, how do you hear that disagreement? What's really at the heart of it is one example, you could say. And then additional questions when there's disagreement. So all of these questions, these resources are in the slide deck for you to really kind of utilize, start practicing them, pick a few, and make them your own, is what I often encourage you to do. There's more questions that you can have when you see hopelessness. Sometimes people have, and the reason I include this is because people often say, I don't know what to say, so I don't say anything. Now y'all know what to say, okay? You have no excuse, no reason. And so, I've worked with teams because sometimes they're just paralyzed because they don't want to say the wrong thing. So I want to make sure that you have some resources of things that you can say and that you can make your own. So then, as we're talking and continuing to have conversation, let's do this kind of last activity that helps us to think about what do we do when a few members dominate the dialogue during a planning meeting. How do we handle this as leaders? How are we managing that power, that privilege, the perspective that's in the room when this situation happens? Go ahead and take 5 minutes, and we're going to come back and hear what you have to say. And then I know that I'm going to at least get one person to come to the right mic and at least get one person to come to the left as well. Or sorry, my left and right. Thank you. So 5 minutes, and then those of you are going to your Zoom rooms, we'll see you in a couple of minutes as well. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So, how did you resolve it? Oh, and I see one person at the left, Mike. Yes, I do see someone coming. Someone's coming, right? To the left? Anybody? Please. Thank you. Thank you. And anyone coming to the right? Love to hear your thoughts there. So, yes, thank you. And then, of course, if anyone in the Zoom rooms online wants to share, just go ahead and let us know. Yeah, so how did we or you all deal with this, or what dynamics did you discover?
So a few things is before the planning meeting to send out the agenda with questions that'll be asked so that every member is to have something prepared so you know everyone should have input. And to make sure everything is sent out at least 48 hours in advance so everyone has time to be prepared.
Great, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Excellent, over here on my right.
So Jeanette Flores-Sagan, a member of many chapters. We had a conversation about opening the meeting with the fact that we're going to ask you to provide your opinion, and that way everybody knows the sort of guidelines, and then give them permission if they don't have anything that's additive or a different view, that it's okay to say, I don't have anything to add.
Great, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you so much. So it's good, and yes, this is kind of simplistic in one hand, yet it also can really be a challenge or a problem. Because especially as we think about areas around power, privilege, how we're sharing power, when you have members or a few people that are constantly kind of dominating the dialogue during certain meetings. And so it's something that we see that's common. So how do you then make sure that you are really setting that inclusive atmosphere and setting the expectation that we want to hear more voices? And then recognizing that there are some people that it does just take a little bit longer to generate thoughts, right? And so the other thing I would also encourage you to do as we're moving forward here is thinking about the instructions that you give about respecting time limits can be helpful, inviting people to be conscious of how folks are bringing their reflections into the dialogue and into the meeting, and just making sure you have a ground rule about how we're sharing that time equitably, especially when a few people dominate the discussion. And a lot of times I will say, I'd love to hear from someone or from folks that we haven't heard from before. Is there anything else that we've missed? Some people, sometimes even in meetings, or if they're larger membership meetings, I'll have a set of index cards and ask people to leave their thoughts, comments, or questions on an index card and pass those forward. That's another way for those that may not necessarily feel comfortable coming forward or may just need a little bit more processing time to do that as well. So those are some tips for you. You all also came up with great tips. And another solution is, as I talked about, wanting to hear from people that we don't hear from and making sure that we are restating the essence of what people have expressed can also be very important as well. Because sometimes when people are communicating and kind of dominating the dialogue, they feel like they haven't been heard. So there's a way to summarize. This is different from when you don't get people in the room participating, and then you kind of get that one person who's willing to share, because no one else in the room wants to share, right? So there's a distinction there. Just wanted to mention that. And so again, just if you have any questions, feel free to pop those in the chat. You can also use the mics to go ahead and come to the mics as we get ready to wind down. And so our final topic today is to think about our commitment. What are our reflections, our takeaways, and ultimately, how are we going to continue on the change leadership process? Center for Creative Leadership, love the work they do. around change leadership and making sure that we are connecting into the research around it. Y'all know I'm an educator, so a lot of times I'll bring in the research pieces because it's important to focus in on and communicate your why. When you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, why is it a value for you? Why are you choosing a particular initiative, a particular speaker, or a particular approach? Make sure that you communicate the why and understand your why. Another element that I think I loved hearing earlier, I'm not sure if it was the Florida area where you all were bringing chapters together. I could have the area wrong, but I think I heard a little bit about how you're collaborating and trying to break down some of those silos even across chapters in the region. So there are opportunities for you all to be able to do that across chapters, okay? And sometimes even within your chapters. Sometimes you get certain committees that, feel like they're kind of off doing their own thing. So think about the dynamics within the chapter, from chapter to chapter, as well as within the chapter, especially on your committees and your teams. And then, of course, commit to it. When you all decide on something, follow through with it, especially related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, because that is connecting back in to your culture. People don't want to see you as performative. You don't want to be seen as performative, that you're just doing this because this is the hot conversation of the moment. I'm hoping that you want to do this because you want to change. You want transformation. We've got to make sure that we are ready for those that are coming into the profession, and that we're also cultivating the pipeline for those to come into the profession. And so with that, that's where I talk about Achieve and kind of a framework for accountability. And these are, again, overarching concepts, making sure that we really align our minds. What's our mindset as a chapter in terms of how we're going to be managing emotions, our bias, all of that? How are we clarifying the behavior and the expectations of our volunteer leaders? One organization I worked with, we had a volunteer leader standards for ethical behavior, and making sure that everyone was clear on that and what that looked like. How are we asking those open-ended questions to be curious? That onboarding process is really key. How then are we also helping each other out? What are the expectations that we are showing empathy, caring, humbleness? I know that these characteristics exist. And then making sure that we investigate our impact versus intent. Remember we were talking about that related to microaggressions and being conscious of our communications. And when we're aware of something, how do we own it and correct it? It's going to be important. And then, of course, finally, to explore the possibilities, be on this learning journey together, and be authentic and genuine and transparent in the process. Finally, value each other's contributions and figure out how you're doing awards in an equitable way. And then also educate and evaluate. Sometimes we put programs, policies, and procedures in place within our chapters, and we don't come back to ask how it's going. Don't be afraid to ask your members how it's going. Doing a 1 to 3 minute survey so that they can give you feedback and you can take a pulse check is really important. And always ensure that your next steps align with your DEI principles and core values. And if you don't have them, please work on going ahead and crystallizing those. And I know some of you are in that process. Some of you are farther along as well. So I've given you a couple of resources as well. There's tons, there's so many out there. These are just some of my favorites here around some of the psychology behind fatigue and Black fatigue, microaggressions, some of the historical context as well. Also, be thinking about white fragility, white rage. You know, what does whiteness mean in our society, and how does that help us and or hinder us from moving forward? Not being white, but I'm talking about the concept around whiteness. Okay, we can have that whole conversation as well, right? And what are the historical contexts there? And then also thinking about racism and how to be an inclusive leader. There are several books here for you to connect in on. And so as we get ready to conclude, there's also information if you like podcasts. Here's some podcasts for you, and also some guides on allyship. Any other questions as we get ready to conclude for today? Okay, and so before we do that, I just want to ask you to think of one word that's a takeaway from our learning session today. I need 10 people to give me one word, and you can just shout them out. You don't have to go to the mic, but just give me one word. Microaggressions. Allyship. Representation. Did I hear education? What else? Ask. Awareness. And then say that one more time. All connected. Transparent, yes. Multiple. Oh, cultural competence. Competence, thank you. And then reach out and the why. Okay, great. And then listen from Chantel online. Thank you. Okay, great. So just want to tell you all a little story. We had an awesome time connecting with fabulous, strong women leaders from Cru on today in September. And we had an opportunity to listen to each other and really talk about having transparent conversations. We also explored cultural competence and how it's so critical for us to reach out, making sure that we remember our why and really enhance our awareness on the journey. We want to make sure that we continue to think about the role of microaggressions and allyship as we are seeking representation within our chapters. Always ask and be willing to be educated, knowing that we have hopefully continued to be on the journey of recognizing that it's all connected. I want to say thank you all very much for your time today. Appreciate you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Sorry, I have to use a step stool for this. A little short, so thank you, Mariama. This was amazing and great information for our members and our chapters and all of the leaders here in the room. And we hope that you take all this information back to your membership and your local markets, and for all of us to take this back to also your companies and your communities. Hopefully everybody learned something today, because I definitely did. At 2:45 today, Pacific time, we will break out into our leadership meetings. Delegates and chapter presidents are required to attend your leadership meetings with your board liaison. If you are not a chapter delegate, nor a president of your chapter, you will stay in this room, or for those of you who are online, link into the event platform via the Zoom and Crew Network CEO Wendy Mann will be hosting a lively event and information exchange for those of you who are not in leadership meetings. If you are virtual and received a specific link to your leadership meeting, which you need to use to attend that leadership meeting, that will be at 2:45. Whoops, I'm sorry. I'm also being asked to remind the retiring delegates to please pick up your gift at the back table when you walk out. There are the gifts there for you. Your leadership meetings will go until 4 p.m. For those of you staying in Las Vegas for the convention, please head directly to the opening reception and marketplace following your leadership meeting. This year, the opening reception and marketplace opens at 3. And I know that a lot of you are not getting out of your leadership meetings till 4, but this was done on purpose to design a way for us to stagger the arrival of all of the attendees and spread it out and provide some social distancing throughout the event. Food and drink will be provided, so be sure to bring your 2 drink tickets that you should have received with your attendee badge. If you look at your attendee badge, you should have drink tickets on the back of that, along with a schedule if you need to refer to your schedule. Again, thank you for making this investment in you and your leadership. I look forward to connecting with you tonight at the marketplace and throughout the convention this week. For those of you with us virtually, thank you for hanging with us for most of your day. We appreciate having you with us, and thank you all, and have a great evening.